welcome to the Popcorn Junkies. I am reviewing a new film called Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Amongst Thieves. Now, I am an enormous Dungeons and Dragons not convert, but sort of not even an aficionado anymore. But I played it when I was a kid. I loved it. We did that thing where there were a few of us for a while who would go to the school library and we would quietly sit with our campaign boards up. One of them, Paul, would be Dungeon Master. I would always want to be a warrior, and then another one of you would be a sorcerer, and you would go on a role-playing journey through a sort of preordained kind of campaign, printed campaign, but made sort of surprising and sort of full of kind of pitfalls and things that you weren't expecting, courtesy of the Dungeon Master. So it's a role-playing game based upon imagination and the rolling of dice and all that sort of stuff. So this film, there have been many attempts to translate this role-playing game, which is hugely successful since the 70s, into films. I think there was one in 2000, 2005, and even 2012. I can't remember which one had Jeremy Irons in it, but they weren't good and they didn't do well. So it's kind of unusual, and I was surprised to see that they were trying to revisit the sort of realm, if you like, of Dungeons and Dragons. I have to say, I'm a huge fan of fantasy films. I like fantasy and sci-fi. Some people who like sci-fi don't like fantasy as much. I was a huge Tolkien fan, and I have to confess, bar the first episode or so, was massively disappointed by Amazon Prime's recent Rings of Power. And I also found, actually, even Peter Jackson's films a little bit overbearing in the end and lost the sort of intricacy of stories, character stories. So this is Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Amongst Thieves, or Honor Among Thieves. And this has a great cast. This has Chris Pine in there. It has Regé-Jean Page in there. And it has Hugh Grant. Those are sort of the big names. Now, Chris Pine, obviously, recently seen in Don't Worry, Darling. Recently, was he dribbled on by Harry Styles? I don't think we'll ever know. Chris Pine has got good comic bones. He was very good, I thought, playing Captain Kirk in the Star Trek films. I thought he had a capacity to play it straight but funny, throwing himself under the bus, and kind of a very self-effacing performer with his comedy. Hugh Grant, you know what? I've only seen Hugh Grant in small roles, and he has quite a sizable role in this. He's the sort of where he becomes the main antagonist in the piece. Also alongside them, as I say, is Regé-Jean Page. And so this adopts the kind of concept, if you like, of going on an adventure, or, you know, going on a campaign. That's what they're called when you're playing the game together. They go off on a campaign, and the campaign is, in a sense, driven by the fact that Chris Pine, his wife is killed by these awful sorceresses and what have you. I forget what their name is, but the sorceress and all the kind of acolytes and all this kind of stuff. And he goes off to search for her because his daughter goes missing, or is removed, or he hands his daughter, that's right, to Hugh Grant, who at the beginning of the film you think, oh, he's good, he's a friend. Hugh Grant plays this totally for gags. He's very funny. I'd say 75% of the time his gags work, 25% of the time less about his performance. I just think the script let him down a few times. So what happened? So really a ragtag band of adventurers, all with different skills. And this is something to reiterate from the role-playing game. When you play the game, you decide what kind of a character you are. I mean, this is designed perfectly for filmmaking, or for casting, or for creating a sort of list of different characters with different strengths. So you'd have, clerics, you'd have sorcerers, you'd have thieves, you'd have bards, you'd have warriors, barbarians, all that kind of stuff. You get different sort of types of people. And so this film does that. This film pulls together essentially a sort of ragtag band of a sorcerer, played by the sorcerer. It's fantastic. Justice Smith. He plays a sort of naive level 1 sorcerer who hasn't quite got to grips with his spells yet. You have Michelle Rodriguez, who plays Holger, who's a sort of barbarian. It's nice that they've given the, in a sense, warrior and beef and sort of strength to a strong female character. And then you have Sophia Lillis playing a druid. Alongside them all, there's Regé-Jean Page, who they intercept for a part of the film, and I think he plays a paladin or whatever. Anyway, so there's all these names. Now, the baddies in this are brilliantly well drawn. I think the design, the makeup, the CGI around the bald-headed sorceresses you'll have seen in the trailer, really effective, and in many regards, I would say, more effective than a lot of the Lord of the Rings stuff on Amazon Prime. Hugh Grant becomes this sort of untrustworthy, double-crossing. He sort of plays himself in a sense. I'm not suggesting for a minute he's double-crossing, but he's very funny. Chris Pine all the way through it has plans, but his plans go out the window. There's lots of kind of wordplay, there's lots of kind of wordsmithery, there's lots of gags, there's lots of funny stuff going on. I would say the script in this is very successful. It's funny. It was much funnier than I was expecting it to be. And in some regards, I think what they're trying to do, but parked within a fantasy world, is this is a bit Guardians of the Galaxy, to be honest with you. Chris Pine very much feels like Star-Lord. Michelle Rodriguez is almost like Drax. And because he's, I'll tell you what I liked about it, because he's searching for his wife, it's not bogged down by any sort of romance, though there's one very slight bit of romantic interest between the Sophia Lillis, the druid, and the sorcerer. So that's quite neat. That's quite nice. Regé-Jean Page, who I have to confess, I was on my own. He's very good looking. He's beautiful. But I didn't think his acting range was particularly good or broad in Bridgerton. His turn in this is hysterical. I mean, again, supported by brilliant script, brilliant scenarios, which are really clever. But his character, I think, is really well drawn. He plays a very straight, serious, kind of, unhumorous kind of character. He's very funny, very funny. And so there are many moments in this where this ragtag bunch of explorers are riffing off each other. And I have to say, me and Maddie saw it, and we really laughed out loud. It was pleasantly surprising. Some of the details as a D&D fan that I was a bit disappointed by, I think, didn't really see enough monsters. But in a weird way, I think that played to the film's strengths. You know, it's not as high budgeted as some of the Marvel films or what have you. Where there were monsters, they were kind of good. But I mean, Dungeons and Dragons is a lot about monsters, and there weren't many. Although the druid, Sophia Lillis, did change into this kind of, I forget what it was called, a sort of bear/eagle type thing. That was good. Lots of fights, lots of swashbuckling fights, which at the beginning were great, and also flecked through, with great humour and fun and silliness, and yet at the same time really well choreographed and believable. The sorceress aspect, essentially the Hugh Grant character has been, in a sense, hoodwinked, or he's become sort of the puppet, if you like, of a much bigger, malevolent force. And so you have this sense of these sorcerers and sorceresses who are wanting to kind of, turn populations into the living dead. Let me just have a coffee. But one of the biggest things about this film that I think is really successful and really clever, when you used to play a game of D&D, and admittedly I ended up playing it an awful lot on my own, which is actually an oxymoron. You can't play this on your own unless you're vaguely able to kind of occupy multiple kind of personalities. Anyway, I just used to love being embedded in the land, just the escapism of the land and what have you. What they do in this, which is really good, when you're playing a game, when you're on a campaign, when you're with your mates in a library or someone's friend's house, and you've got low lights and you've got the board up and all that kind of stuff, you are essentially a bunch of teenagers who are useless. You're useless teenagers in the real world. You couldn't string a sentence together. You couldn't tie your laces up. You couldn't make a cup of tea or boil an egg. You're crap. You're useless. Generally, unfortunately, it's a gross generalization. If you're playing D&D, you're a bit socially kind of on the margins. So you're not like Mr. Popular at school or Mrs. Popular at school. And what I liked about that, so what you do in a sense, this is the earliest stage of being able to sort of take on an avatar and imagine being sort of a warrior or a sorcerer or a wizard, all these kind of things. So, you could live vicariously through the characters that you create, and across time, your characters would grow in strength, experience, prowess, all that kind of stuff, wealth, whatever. And so it allowed you as a teenager to kind of grow. And what they do that's really clever in this is all of our characters have pretty obvious weaknesses, naiveties. They're not effective at certain things. They make mistakes. They're clumsy. They're a bit sort of foolish. And what they've managed to embed in each of the characters in this film are the personalities, or the behind the scenes personalities of the people who play, would play the game and still do play the game. So there was a feeling that they weren't sort of super efficient, that they were learning on the job type thing. And that for me really spoke to me as a Dungeons and Dragons fan, that actually, within these characters, you felt the idea and the DNA, if you like, of gamers, D&D gamers behind them, sort of within them, in a sense. Some of the notably funny moments. There's a very, very funny moment where Regé-Jean Page sort of heads off at one point. I won't give away the gag, but it's just very funny. Their sort of commentary on the way he walks off is incredibly witty. And there are some really nice, believable touches to some of the magic that the sort of, to begin with, slightly naive and inexperienced sorcerer uses. I think he uses a device that gives him the hither, spell that's the hither and thither, which means you can, as long as you can see the two spaces that you're wanting to travel from one to the other, you can create a whole portal, jump in it, and you come out on the other side. Neat details like that that really sort of tallied with some of the spells, some of the character traits that you get within the game. Don't forget, the game has all these kind of books and manuals, and there's so many sort of incredibly detailed rules and regulations in terms of fighting and all that kind of stuff. So it delivers on those. I thought it had some really inventive and really clever, you know, sorcery, spelly type stuff as well. Sometimes the script let it down, sometimes it sort of missed its target in the comedy, but when it hit its target, it was very good. It had lots of those brilliant scenes which you get in the game where you're going down corridors, you've got a torch, it blows out, what are you going to do? You're going to press the door, press the button, are you going to go across the bridge? All that kind of stuff. You felt those choices in there. I thought it did a really good job of reimagining and delivering on what I think a lot of fans of the game have in their imagination. So I think it was quite a difficult thing, because of course, you know, it's an imaginative role-playing game. So to pin it down to anything is always tricky and dangerous. And I wonder whether that's what's made the previous incarnations of this not work. I think the clever touch they've done here is it doesn't take itself seriously, but it's not as if it doesn't take itself seriously enough that you don't believe the world that they're in. The world's quite well drawn, there's some brilliant locations, very hobbity type things, but I found actually more inviting than the wall-to-wall CGI of, say, Amazon's Rings of Power. So all in all, I found this a really enjoyable Friday night film at the cinema. I would have to say it's too long. It is far too long. I think it comes in at about 2 hours. It could have done with shaving about 20 minutes off. I thought the cleverness and nuance of Hugh Grant's character kind of got lost towards the end. I think his story arc kind of ran out of steam towards the end. And as I say, the villain in the piece was really, I thought really, she was really horrible and really well drawn and beautiful at the same time. And I could have done with a little bit more depth there. So all in all, I feel like this film kind of delivered 3/4 of the way there. So it was a pleasant surprise. And I think if you've got kids and you want a sort of a bit of a laugh, Guardians of the Galaxy-esque, but parked within a fantasy land, this is your film. If I was to score it, it's very hard to score this film alongside, you know, in and of its own terms, in terms of it being an entertaining family film, I'd go as high as to say around about 70%. I think 70% is a fair score. I think it was surprisingly impressive, and Chris Pine is really good. He's the centerpiece of this, and he doesn't mind at all sending himself up. He's a kind of useless, witless hero, and they even right down to him even being a shit dad in it. You know, that's quite a nice touch too. So all in all, I would fully recommend going to see Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves.